We're working to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching ASEAN in Focus on today's headlines. Several areas in Luzon are now under tropical cyclone wind signal number 1 due to tropical depression Maymay. Malaysia's Prime Minister dissolved its parliament today to clear the way for snap elections in a bid to restore political stability as the country emerges from the ravages of COVID-19 and a multi-billion-dollar corruption scandal. And later, President Bongbong Marcos Jr. believes that mental health should be a priority. He made this remark as the Philippines joins the world in celebration of World Mental Health Day. First in our news, several areas in Luzon are now under tropical cyclone wind signal number 1. This is due to tropical depression Maymay. Let's go to the DOST Pagasa Weather Forecasting Center. Let's listen in.
Gaya nga po ng nabanggit kanina ng ating administrator, dalawang bagyo actually minomonitor natin. No? Unahin po natin ang tropical depression na si Maymay na kaninang alas 10 ay nasa layong 285 kilometers ng layo, silangan ng Kasiguran, Aurora. Yung bagyo, west-southwestward, yung kumpol na kaulapan, talagang nahalos na balot na itong nakararaming bahagi ng Northern Luzon area. Bukod pa dyan, ito nga isang tropical depression naman sa labas ng ating air responsibility, tinatayang nasa layong 2,020 kilometers silangan ng Southern Luzon area. So wala pa itong direktang epekto sa namang bahagi ng ating bansa, pero subject for monitoring din po ito. So inaasahan magiging mabagal ang pagkilos ni Maymay, west or southwestward, then westward towards the Central Luzon area. And then Maymay's forecast to make landfall in the vicinity of Aurora or the northern portion of Quezon. So, yung dalawang lalawigan nun, dapat maging handa sa possible landfall. Pero, bibigyan din po natin ulit yung area of probability na nagpapakita na hindi lamang yung Quezon or Aurora ang dapat maging handa, kundi maging ang lalawigan ng Isabela at ilang bahagi po ng southern, ng Bicol region, particular na itong Camarines Norte. So area probability nagpapakita ng iba pang areas na pwedeng maging actual na movement ni Maymay within the forecast period. Tropical cyclone wind signal number 1 nakataas sa mga areas na nakakulay blue, lalawigan ng Isabela, Quirino, Nueva Vizcaya, Aurora, Nueva Ecija at maging dito sa extreme northern portion ng Quezon kasama ang Pulilo Island. So pag nagtaas tayo ng warning signal number 1 ngayon, hindi naman po agad-agad na sa mga oras na ito'y matindi na yung weather dito. But may lead time po tayo para makapaghanda yung mga kababayan natin dito sa mga posibleng pag-ulan at pagbugso ng hangin na dala ng bagyong si Maymay. Simula ngayong alas 11 ng umaga hanggang bukas, alas 11 ng umaga, Wednesday, makikita natin yung concentration ng paulan. Marami talaga inaasahan natin paulan dito sa ilang bahagi ng Northern Luzon. Bukod pa dyan, makikita rin natin dito, no? Yung area nila ito, bagamat napakalayo ng bagyo, dahil may umiiral din tayong shear line na nakatutok dito sa ilang bahagi ng Northern Luzon. Then pagdating naman simula Wednesday ng alas 11 ng umaga hanggang Thursday ng alas 11 ng umaga, makikita natin may considerable amount of rains pa rin ilang bahagi ng Northern Central Luzon area. Then may ulan din dito sa Eastern Seaboard nga ng Northern and Central Luzon. And then sa pangatlong araw ng forecast period natin, makikita natin wala nang ganong matinding pag-ulan dito nga sa may bandang Northern Luzon. Pero pansinin natin, no, offshore, may ulan dito sa bahagi ito ng karagatang Pasipiko.
Heat waves already kill thousands of people every year, and they could overwhelm the world's aid response unless action is taken to mitigate climate change. Again, let's listen in.
Note, today the OCHA and the International Federation for Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies released a report which says the heat waves continue for some of the deadliest disasters that are intensifying. ahead of COP27 in Egypt next month. The report details how extreme heat events foreshadow a less habitable world and says that countries must take aggressive steps now to avert potentially recurrent heat disasters. The report also offers concrete steps that humanitarians and decision makers can take to mitigate extreme heat's worst impact. More online.
The report also details recommendations and best practice from developing countries that have put in place measures to support long-term adaptation to climate change. In tonight's other news, jailed Leila de Lima was briefly taken hostage on Sunday during an attempted breakout by 3 detained militants who were shot dead by police. A police officer handing out breakfast was stabbed with a fork by an inmate who then freed 2 others from their cells. Now 2 of the prisoners were shot dead by the sniper. A buddy system will now be enforced for police officers deployed at the Philippine National Police Custodial Center in Camp Crame as part of stricter measures. Let's listen in.
Dapat ay araw-araw po ay ini-implement po nila kung ano yung nakalagay sa kanilang parang pinaka-Bible o pinaka-checklist. Lalo na yung mga bumibisita po because it is very clear na merong improvised na weapon na nagamit itong mga hostage takers na to. Kaya po nagawang pagsasaksakin yung ating police po. So this time is we really need to be strict. Doon po sa mga bumibisita, i-check po isa-isa yung mga dala-dala po ng mga visitors. And at the same time, it should be a body-body system when it comes to the distribution of food to the detainees.
Sir, last follow-up. Sir, nabanggit niyo yung ginamit na improvised na patalim. Isa ba yun? Kasalukuyan ba, sir? Ano bang ginagamit na mga utensils, na mga PUPCs natin, sir?
Usually, yun nga, gumagamit sila siyempre mga hindi naman natin i-expect na itatago nila yon or may magpapalusot ng So ang ginagamit nila is yung metal na fork and spoon. Ang part niyan is nakakulong naman sila. Ang expectations natin ay walang lulusot na mga weapons na magagamit nila na makakasakit sa mga tao doon, whether detained or hindi. So we continue yung sa akin is we will continue that. Magkakaroon lang sila ng parang kabady na sisiguraduhin na hindi sila pagtutulong-tulungan. Plus, to ensure na ang nangyari kasi doon is pagpapakain and then yun yung time din na pwede silang magpainit. So talagang pinagplanuhan din nila kung paano atakihin yung pulis natin.
Inutusan ako ni Presidente para sabihin kay Senator na if she wishes, she could have another facility. It might be a bigger one at her option. Kung gusto niya, dahil nga nangyari, at another facility, may 3 escapees na tumakas. Pagkatapos, unfortunately, yung isa napadaan malapit doon sa kanyang compound sa facility niya. Doon siya na hostage. So, what is important here is the safety of the senator. Yun ang gusto ng ating presidente.
President Bongbong Marcos Jr. said he will allow the transfer of former Senator Leila de Lima to another detention facility after the incident. He also directed Camp Crame to enforce all measures necessary to prevent acts of violence at the custodial center and other detention centers of the Philippine National Police. Police Chief General Rodolfo Azurin said the 3 inmates were members of the militant group Abu Sayyaf, which has been accused of kidnapping and beheading several foreigners. Investigation showed the 3 inmates, Arnel Cabintoy, Feliciano Sulayaw, and Abdul Jihad Susukan, attacked Corporal Roger Agustin on Sunday, who was distributing the food ration alone. Patrolman Lawrence Matias shot the three. Cabintoy and Suzukan were killed on the spot, while Sulayaw ran toward the Maximum Compounds building and, reaching the cell of De Lima, tried to hold her hostage. The inmates used a fork, which was turned into an improvised knife, in stabbing Agustin and in taking De Lima as a hostage. The tactical team negotiated with Sulayaw, but to no avail. Since the situation was escalating, they engaged Sulayaw and he was neutralized, ending the escape attempt at 7:18 a.m. In other news, Malaysia's Prime Minister dissolved parliament to clear the way for snap elections in a bid to restore political stability as the country emerges from the ravages of COVID-19 and a multi-billion-dollar corruption scandal. Yesterday, I met the King and I sought his permission to dissolve the parliament. And the King agreed to my request to dissolve parliament today, according to Prime Minister Ismail Yaacob in a televised address following his audience with Sultan Abdullah. The palace said the King expressed displeasure with the current political developments and had no choice but to agree to the Prime Minister's request for early polls for the people to vote for a stable government. The Election Commission will announce the polling date likely in the next few days. Parliament's dissolution came days after the government unveiled a populist budget that included a few $1 billion worth of cash handouts and a cut in personal income taxes. Malaysia has been in political turmoil since the last national elections in 2018, when a reformist pact steered by ex-leader Mahathir Mohamad overwhelmingly defeated an alliance led by UMNO, the main party that ruled the country for more than 60 years. Then incumbent Najib Razak, who was embroiled in a scandal where billions of dollars were alleged to have been looted from the 1MDB Sovereign Wealth Fund, was ousted as Prime Minister. He was later convicted of corruption following a lengthy trial and started serving a 12-year jail term in August for the initial batch of charges. He faces more charges that could put him in jail longer. Now, hopes for stability after Najib's ouster faded quickly, however, as Mahathir's government collapsed after 22 months due to infighting. He was succeeded by his former right-hand man, Muhyiddin Yassin, but growing public anger over his handling of the pandemic forced him to resign less than 2 years after he took office, and Ismail Yaacob was named Malaysia's new prime minister. Ismail's rule was relatively peaceful, although there have been questions about its mandate. Analysts said the elections will hopefully give the next government a stronger hand to shepherd the country over a 5-year term. In tonight's other news, the International Monetary Fund annual meeting is taking place as the world grapples with the sharpest downturn or sharpest slowdown in economic activity in 80 years. Rising inflation, a food and energy crisis, the war in Ukraine, the continuing impact of COVID, and climate change. Now, these compounding crises are threatening livelihoods and taking a toll on the most vulnerable. IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva and the World Bank Group President David Malpass discussed the profound urgency for policymakers, international organizations, and the private sectors to decisive action, and how the IMF and World Bank Group are working to support countries in addressing the problems. David Malpass, the World Bank president, warned of growing risk of a global recession. Take a look.
There's the risk and the real danger of a world recession next year. The advanced economies are slowing in Europe, and so we'll see where it goes into next year. But the currency depreciation means that the debt levels for the developing countries are getting more and more burdensome. The rise in interest rates puts added weight on it, and inflation is still a major problem for everyone, but especially for the poor. So those are all issues. We have World Bank has a lot of data coming out. We did our poverty report last week for the first time in 2 years, or it's a 2-year cycle. It shows 70 million more in poverty, and also very concerning, a 4% reduction in median income. So as we think about our goal of shared prosperity, it's not happening. There's reversals going on in development. I call it a crisis facing development.
We have calculated that about 1/3 equivalent of the world economy would have at least 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth this year, next year, and that the total amount that would be wiped out by the slowdown of the world economy is going to be, between now and 2026, $4 trillion. This is the size of Germany GDP gone. We are seeing slowdown in all 3 key economies of the world. Eurozone, because primarily of gas prices shooting up. China, because of COVID disruptions, and the volatility of the housing sector. We see a very significant problem in China, dragging down growth. And in the United States, still very strong labor market, but also losing a bit of momentum because interest rates are starting to bite.
And also tonight, the international community calling out on Russia on the deadly missile attacks on Ukraine, with U.S. President Biden saying this just shows the, quote, the utter brutality of Mr. Putin's illegal war on the Ukrainian people. The UN also holding an emergency session after over 80 Russian missiles hit cities across Ukraine. Mr. Putin warned Ukraine he was ready to authorize more severe attacks. Take a look.
В случае продолжения попыток проведения на нашей территории терактов, ответы со стороны России будут жесткими и по своим масштабам будут соответствовать уровню угроз, создаваемых Российской Федерацией. Ни у кого не должно быть никаких в этом сомнений.
На сьогоднішній день в нашому місті на сьогоднішній ранок було 5 людей, які загинули. 42 людини зараз знаходяться в лікарнях, і деякі з них знаходяться в критичному стані, тому кількість загиблих може збільшитись.
Mass retaliatory Russian strikes across Ukraine on Monday killed at least 10 people and hurt dozens more, according to the National Police Service. The missiles that sowed death and destruction in the Ukrainian capital for the first time in almost 4 months came in frightening roars early Monday. The explosion smashed and shook buildings, burst water mains, left craters and torched automobiles, jarring Kiev's nearly 3 million people, including jolting some out of their sleep as the city began its work week. Ukraine's army said that Russia has launched 84 cruise missiles at Ukraine 2 days after a large explosion damaged a bridge connecting Russia to Crimea in an attack Moscow blamed on Kiev. European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen called the attacks on Kiev and other Ukrainian cities vicious. And the EU's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, also said on Twitter he was deeply shocked by Russia's attacks on civilians. He said such acts have no place in the 21st century. I condemn them in the strongest possible terms. He added that additional military support from the EU is on its way for Ukraine, referring to a new €500 million tranche of funding the EU is looking to agree for Kiev's military purchases from bloc members. In tonight's other news, President Bongbong Marcos Jr. believes that mental health should be a global priority. He made this remark as the Philippines joins the world in celebration of World Mental Health Day, which aims to raise awareness of mental health issues and mobilize efforts in support of mental health. Because the pandemic amplified more serious mental health problems, President Marcos underscored the importance of fostering kindness. Meantime, the National Mental Health Week in the country would be from October 10 to 16. Nearly 1 billion people live with a mental health condition across the globe. But despite that staggering number, Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez highlighted that it remains one of the most neglected aspects of healthcare. In his message marking World Health Mental Day, the UN chief said there were profound social and economic repercussions stemming from that neglect. Take a look.
Today, a very important day. It is World Mental Health Day. In a message for the day, the Secretary General notes that 1 billion people live with a mental health condition, but mental health remains one of the most neglected aspects of healthcare. The Secretary General stressed that we must strengthen the capacity of health services to offer quality care to those in need, in particular young people, adding that we must also address stigma and discrimination and must prevent the root causes of mental health conditions, including violence and abuse.
And another dialogue partner of ASEAN, Japan, has reopened its doors to tourists after 2.5 years of tough COVID restrictions, with officials hoping an influx of travelers enticed by a weak yen will boost the economy. By mid-morning, tourists from Israel, France, and Britain were already pouring in. Let's listen in.
Wanted to come to Japan for a long time. It's been kind of on our bucket list of places to see for a long time, and then my job changing and Japan reopening meant it was a perfect opportunity for us to do that. And so we spent last week planning, and then the reopening meant it was perfect.
Just waiting until the announcement about the border opening, and as soon as I heard it's going to open in the 11th, I started planning, and here I am.
Japan slammed its borders shut early in the pandemic, at one point even barring foreign residents from returning, and has only recently begun cautiously reopening. In June, it began allowing tourists to visit in groups accompanied by guides, a requirement that was further relaxed to include self-guided package tours. From Tuesday today, visa-free entry resumed for travelers from 68 countries and territories. Japan also lifted a cap on the number of arrivals and ended the package tour requirement. Tourists must still present either proof of vaccination or a negative coronavirus test taken 3 days before departure. For a number of Japanese companies, the ASEAN member states have been important investment destinations in parallel with China and the U.S. Japan and the ASEAN member states have consolidated institutional frameworks to further vitalize trade and investment activities by concluding or signing bilateral economic partnership agreements, or EPAs, as well as investment agreements. The ASEAN-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement also went into force on December 1, 2008, between the ASEAN as a whole and Japan. In 2018, more than 13,000 Japanese companies operated in the ASEAN region, and the number of Japanese people living in the region surpassed 200,000. And urban experts from across Southeast Asia will discuss urban parks and green cities during a 3-day event organized by the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Ecosystems Research and Development Bureau. Dubbed R&D Conference on Urban Parks and Green Cities, a Sustainable Future in Southeast Asia, the event brings together delegates from member countries and dialogue partners of the ASEAN from October 11 to the 13th in Metro Manila, according to its news release issued by the DENR. DENR ERDB Director Maria Lourdes Ferrer said through the conference they hope to address emerging issues and concerns, knowledge gaps, and challenges faced by urban parks and green cities. The conference also aims to provide a platform for the government, research community, and institutions for the exchange of information generated from R&D as it targets sustainable development and management of parks and green cities. It also intends to address the emerging issues and concerns, knowledge gaps, and challenges faced by these cities. A scenic boat ride in the blue waters of Masbate's Ticao Island brings you to the lush mangrove forests of Bong Sanglay Natural Park, a 244-hectare protected area that is home to 34 mangrove species, including the biggest mangrove tree in the Bicol region. Let's take a look. As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angeles. Thank you for joining us. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.